When Jonathan Roumie entered Judge Judy's courtroom as a simple witness, he never imagined he would become the target of the cruelest spiritual attack ever broadcast on television. What began as testimony about a stolen bracelet quickly turned into a brutal assault on his deepest beliefs, his faith, his grief over the loss of loved ones, and his spiritual connection to the divine. Judge Judy tore at his soul with surgical precision, using his sacred experiences as weapons to humiliate him in front of millions. But when she crossed one final unforgivable line, something awakened in Jonathan that the world had never seen before. His response didn't just defend himself. It changed how millions of people think about faith, dignity, and the power of quiet strength. Oh, and before we dive into this incredible story, tell us, what's your all-time favorite episode of The Chosen? Leave your answer in the comments. It was a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles when Jonathan Roumie found himself in the most unlikely place imaginable. Judge Judy's courtroom waiting room. Not as a celebrity guest or for a promotional appearance, but as a reluctant witness in a small case involving his former employee. The case was simple. Maria Santos, an elderly housekeeper who had worked for Jonathan for 3 years, was being sued by her former employer, a wealthy real estate developer named Richard Blackstone, for allegedly stealing jewelry. Maria claimed the jewelry was a gift from a previous employer, and Jonathan was the only person who could confirm her story, as he had been present when the gift was given. Jonathan sat silently in the corner of the waiting area, wearing his typical understated outfit: jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a worn leather jacket. He tried to stay inconspicuous, but it was impossible to go unnoticed. Other litigants whispered and pointed, some discreetly snapping photos with their phones. "Is that him?" a young woman whispered to her friend. "I think so, but what's he doing here?" came the hushed reply. Jonathan pretended not to hear, focusing on the book in his hands, a worn copy of The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Reading had always been his refuge, a way to find peace in the chaos. But today, not even Kempis' words could calm the growing unease in his chest. Judge Judy's show producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet, had briefed him earlier on the format. "Just answer the questions directly," she said. "Judge Judy likes straight answers." But there was something in Janet's tone that hinted this appearance might be more complicated than a simple witness testimony. The way she looked at him, like an exotic animal on display, set off alarms. Maria Santos sat across from him, her aged hands trembling slightly as she held a manila folder containing the few pieces of evidence she had. At 73, she had spent her life cleaning houses, sending money back to her family in El Salvador, and never asked for more than respect and fair pay. "Mr. Jonathan," she said softly with a light accent, "I'm sorry you have to be here. I know you have important things to do." Jonathan closed the book and gave her his full attention. "Maria, there's no place I'd rather be. You've always been kind and honest. If I can help prove that, then this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The simple exchange was heard by several people in the waiting room, and Jonathan noticed how a few faces softened. There he was, a star known for portraying Jesus Christ, treating a housekeeper with respect and genuine kindness. Not for the cameras, not for publicity, but because it was the right thing to do. Richard Blackstone, however, remained unmoved. A man in his 60s, with graying hair and an expensive suit, he cast disdainful glances at both Maria and Jonathan since he arrived. "I don't care if he plays Jesus or not," Blackstone told his lawyer loud enough for everyone to hear. "The maid stole from me, and I want justice." The casual cruelty of referring to Maria as the maid made Jonathan's jaw tighten, but he said nothing. He had long learned that some battles are best fought in silence. A production assistant appeared. "Santos versus Blackstone. You're up." As they made their way to the courtroom, Jonathan felt that familiar sensation before difficult scenes, a mix of anticipation and dread. He had faced spiritual challenges on his own journey and in his roles, but somehow walking into Judge Judy's courtroom felt more intimidating than any stage or camera. Judge Judy was already in her seat, reviewing the case files with intensity. In person, she was smaller than she appeared on TV, but her presence filled the room like an impending storm. When Jonathan took his assigned spot, he caught her gaze for a moment. There was something there, a flicker of recognition mixed with anticipation. It wasn't the look of someone about to conduct a fair hearing, but what Judge Judy didn't know was that she was about to underestimate the quiet man standing before her. And in just a few minutes, her attempt to humiliate him would backfire, shocking millions of viewers around the world. Judge Judy wasted no time asserting her dominance. She looked up with the expression of someone who had already made up her mind before hearing a single word. So we have a housekeeper claiming the jewelry was a gift, and now Hollywood's Christian royalty graces us with his presence to defend the help. The phrase, the help, dripped with the same contempt Blackstone had used, setting the tone for what was to come. Jonathan noticed Maria shrink slightly, her shoulders drooping. Your Honor, Maria's representative began, Mr. Roumie is here only to confirm what he witnessed. I wasn't talking to you, Judge Judy cut him off. Mr. Roumie, step forward. Jonathan walked to the center of the room. His movements were calm and controlled, despite the tension. He'd been in hostile environments before, but this one felt different, more personal, more calculated. So, you're here to testify that this woman, Judge Judy gestured toward Maria, did not steal a diamond bracelet worth $12,000? Yes, Your Honor. I was present when Mrs. Chen, Maria's former employer, gave her the bracelet as a retirement gift. Oh, you were present, she said with a sarcastic laugh. I suppose in your world, housekeepers regularly receive $12,000 gifts. The question came laced with sarcasm, suggesting Jonathan was lying or so out of touch that he mistook the absurd for the ordinary. In my experience, Jonathan answered calmly, Mrs. Chen was a generous woman who valued Maria's 20 years of loyal service. Your experience, she repeated mockingly. And what exactly qualifies your experience in domestic work matters? Do you clean your own home, Mr. Roumie? Do you know what normal people give their maids when they retire? A card, maybe a small bonus, not jewelry worth more than most people earn in a year. Jonathan felt under attack, but this wasn't a script where he could respond with a monologue. This was Judge Judy's domain, and she made it clear his faith, his reputation, and his truth were on trial. He took a deep breath and answered with the firmness of someone who lives what he believes. With all due respect, Your Honor, maybe what's common for some shouldn't be the limit of what's possible. And that's when everything began to change. Judge Judy was shifting from professional skepticism to personal attack, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. I believe in treating people with dignity and respect, Kiana replied, her voice firm despite the growing hostility. Judge Judy laughed again, now openly disdainful. Dignity and respect. How wonderfully philosophical. Tell me, Mr. Roumie, do you consider yourself a spiritual person? The question seemed to come out of nowhere, completely unrelated to the case at hand. Jonathan hesitated, sensing a trap but unsure of its nature. Yes, I would say I have spiritual beliefs. Spiritual beliefs? Judge Judy repeated, as if the words tasted bad in her mouth. Very well. And do these spiritual beliefs include the unconventional ideas you've expressed in interviews about life after death, reincarnation, that sort of mystical nonsense? The courtroom fell silent. Even lawyer Blackstone seemed surprised by the direction Judge Judy was taking. This was supposed to be about a stolen bracelet, not Jonathan's personal beliefs. I don't see how my personal beliefs relate to this case, Jonathan said, his voice carrying only a hint of steel. Oh, they do relate, Judge Judy said with a smile that was anything but pleasant. They relate because they say a lot about your credibility as a witness. If someone believes in fairy tales, how can we trust their perception of reality? Maria looked horrified. This was not what she was seeking. She just wanted someone to tell the truth. And now that person was being attacked for helping her. But Judge Judy was not finished. She was only getting started. And what she said next would cross a line that could not be uncrossed. She leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who had just uncovered the opponent's weakness. Attacking Jonathan's spiritual beliefs seemed to have energized her. Let me be more specific, Mr. Roumie, she continued. Reviewing your interviews and posts, you have publicly spoken about believing that deceased loved ones communicate with you from beyond. The question hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Several people audibly choked. Maria Santos covered her mouth, horrified. Even Blackstone shifted uncomfortably, realizing Judge Judy had just touched the most painful wound in Jonathan's life. Jonathan remained perfectly still, but those who knew him well would have noticed a subtle change in his posture. His breathing became more controlled. His shoulders adjusted. He was preparing for battle. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I don't see how my personal pain relates to this case." "Your personal pain?" Judge Judy sneered. "Is that what we call delusions now?" "Mr. Roumie, you stated in interviews that you felt your father's presence after his death. You spoke about signs, messages. That's not mourning. That's fantasy." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She wasn't just questioning Jonathan's credibility as a witness. She was attacking the most sacred and painful part of his life for the court's entertainment. "Furthermore," she went on, clearly enjoying herself, "you mentioned believing in divine mercy, the intercession of saints, the power of prayer, miracles. You talked about spiritual retreats and your work as the interpreter of Jesus Christ in The Chosen. Tell me, Mr. Roumie, in what reality does a rational person base their worldview on? Alternative beliefs?" The audience in the courtroom was visibly uncomfortable. This was no longer a trial, it was a cruel spectacle. But Judge Judy's authority was supreme in her chamber, and no one dared to intervene. Jonathan remained silent, but his silence was not submission. It was the calm before the storm that the judge did not see coming. "And your donations," she continued merciless. "You donated to hospitals, evangelization projects, homeless people, Catholic missions. Some would call that generosity. I call it guilt. Desperate actions of someone trying to buy salvation or good karma." She paused dramatically. "So, Mr. Roumie, I ask again, how can this court trust the testimony of someone living in a fantasy world of spiritual communication with the dead, divine justice, and miracles? How can we trust someone whose grasp on reality is so tenuous?" It was a brutal and comprehensive attack. Judge Judy had dismantled, piece by piece, everything that made Jonathan who he was. His faith, his pain, his compassion, his hope. Maria Santos was crying now. Her simple case had turned into a character assassination spectacle. "Please," she whispered, "this is not necessary." But Judge Judy was not finished. She was intoxicated by her supposed victory and wanted the final blow. "Mr. Roumie," she said with false compassion, "what we're seeing here is a man so disconnected from reality, so lost in his bubble of fame and religious fans, that he actually believes a maid received a bracelet as a gift. Because in his world of spiritual fantasies, that makes sense. But in the real world, that's illusion." Silence took over the courtroom. The judge had just accused Jonathan Roumie, one of the most respected actors for his testimony of faith, of being delusional, using his deepest beliefs as a weapon. But what she didn't realize was that she had just awakened something in Jonathan that few had ever witnessed. The calm, kind, patient man was about to remind her that there is a difference between meekness and weakness. He stood in the center of the courtroom, absorbing the weight of every word. Inside, however, something crystallized. Years of prayer, meditation, mourning, and service were merging into a moment of absolute clarity. He thought of his father, Joseph, and how his faith was built on the simplicity of love, honor, sacrifice. He thought of the silent night when he realized God does not abandon those who suffer. He thought of Maria Santos, who cried behind him, and how she said his kindness reminded her of her late husband, a man who believed God's justice prevails even when the world fails. Judge Judy was still speaking, but he no longer heard the words as wounds. He saw her as his spiritual mentors taught him, as someone in suffering, disconnected from her own soul. "Are you listening to me?" the judge retorted, realizing something had changed in his face. Where there was tension and restraint, now there was peace. "I am listening," Jonathan said with a serene voice. "I am listening to everything." "Good, because I want you to understand this court deals with facts, not feelings or beliefs." Jonathan gently interrupted her. His voice made everyone in the room lean in. "May I ask you a question?" The judge blinked, caught off guard. "Have you ever lost someone you loved?" The question hung in the air, simple and direct. completely changing the energy of the room. From that moment, the courtroom would never be the same. Have you ever held someone you loved as they died? Felt the exact moment when the spirit left the body? When that person was no longer there? Judge Judy opened her mouth, but no words came out. The question caught her completely unprepared. Because I have felt that, Jonathan Roumie continued, his voice growing firmer. I held my baby girl when she was born and felt her presence, even though she never breathed. I held my best friend as he passed and felt something leave that room, something much bigger than just physical life. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving. I have sat with children in oncology wards, children who speak of seeing their deceased grandparents, children who describe places they've never been, children who know things they couldn't possibly know. Are they delirious too? Judge Judy tried to regain control. Mr. Roumie, this is not appropriate. But Jonathan's voice was calm and at the same time growing in power. You want to talk about reality? Fine. Reality is that consciousness is the greatest mystery we face. Reality is that love connects us in ways science is still trying to understand. And dismissing experiences you haven't had doesn't make you rational. It just makes you closed off. He took a step toward the judge's bench. Not aggressively, but with the confidence of someone who had found his purpose. You spent the last 10 minutes attacking my beliefs, my grief, my character. You took my daughter's pain and turned it into entertainment. You mocked my spirituality and called my generosity guilt. But what you did not do was face the simple fact that I am here to speak the truth about what I witnessed. Judy was visibly shaken. She realized her attack had completely backfired. The truth, Jonathan continued, is that Mrs. Chen gave that bracelet to Maria because she recognized something you seem unable to see. That some people deserve kindness. Not because of status or wealth, but because of who they are. What happened next changed not only the courtroom, but everyone watching around the world. Jonathan Roumie was about to teach a lesson in dignity that would echo for generations. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. Judge Judy, moments ago in full attack mode, now faced something she had not seen on television for decades. Someone who refused to be diminished. Jonathan remained still, but his presence now seemed to fill the entire space. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who had faced suffering with faith and found meaning in pain. Your Honor, he said gently, making his words even more powerful, you asked about my beliefs. Allow me to say what I believe. Judy tried to interrupt, but something about Jonathan's presence made her stop. I believe Maria Santos spent her life serving with dignity and grace. I believe Mrs. Chen recognized that service and chose to honor it. I believe treating people with kindness, regardless of their job or social status, is not naive. It is the most sensible thing we can do. He made a slight gesture toward Maria, who looked at him with tears in her eyes. I believe that when we die, the love we gave and received continues to matter. I believe consciousness is not limited to the brain, that connection goes beyond physical touch, and that rejecting these experiences as fantasies says more about those who reject them than those who live them. The courtroom was mesmerized. Jonathan was not being defensive or argumentative. He was giving a calm, profound testimony from someone who had lived through intense losses and found meaning in them. But above all, Jonathan continued, his voice stronger now, I believe using someone's grief as a weapon, mocking their spirituality for entertainment, and attacking their character to avoid facing simple facts is not justice. It is cruelty disguised as authority. Judge Judy's face showed surprise, discomfort, and something close to regret. Mr. Roumie, she said, trying to regain control, this court is no place for sermons. No, Jonathan said firmly, this court should be a place for truth. And for the first time, his voice took on a sharp tone that made everyone sit up straighter. The truth is, you spent more time attacking my faith than examining the evidence in this case. He pulled something from his jacket pocket, his phone. I have photos from Mrs. Chen's retirement party where she gives the bracelet to Maria in front of 12 witnesses. I have a video of the speech where she mentions the bracelet as a symbol of gratitude for Maria's 2 decades of service. The judge's expression changed completely. What? She stammered. I have all the documentation that proves what Maria claimed, Jonathan replied calmly. I tried to send this to the appropriate channels before the hearing, but was told it wasn't necessary, as this was a simple matter of credibility. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Attorney Richard Blackstone turned pale. Judy looked at Jonathan as if seeing him for the first time, but instead of examining the evidence, she hesitated, and Jonathan continued. You chose to promote a character assassination based on my beliefs. You turned this courtroom into a stage for cruelty. You used my pain as spectacle. He looked directly into the camera for the first time. And everyone watching this will see exactly what happened here. They will see a woman in a position of authority attacking instead of investigating, choosing entertainment over truth. Judge Judy was visibly shaken. Mr. Roumie, I was only trying to humiliate me, he answered, his voice serene but firm. You mock beliefs that comfort millions, but power without wisdom is just organized cruelty. The transformation was complete. The man who entered as a reluctant witness was now a moral authority that not even Judy could silence. Do you know what I believe about justice? Jonathan said, now with the entire room attentive to every word. I believe justice requires humility, courage to admit when we are wrong, and requires treating every person, regardless of background, belief, or position, with human dignity. He turned to Maria Santos. And I believe she deserves her case to be judged on its merits, not obscured by attacks on those who tried to help her. Whatever Judge Judy said next would either save her reputation or destroy it completely. But one thing was certain. She had just learned that some people cannot be diminished no matter how much authority is wielded against them. The judge sat in silence. The weight of Jonathan's words hung like a thick blanket over the courtroom. Perhaps for the first time in her television career, she had been completely outmatched, not by legal technicalities or defense strategies, but by pure moral authority. The evidence on Jonathan's phone was irrefutable. The photos clearly showed Mrs. Chen handing the bracelet amid applause. The video captured her emotional speech. This bracelet represents my gratitude to Maria for her integrity, loyalty, and kind heart. The judge stammered, looking at the phone screen. Why? Wasn't this presented before? It was submitted to your producers 3 weeks ago, Jonathan replied, along with testimonies and documents proving Mrs. Chen's history of giving symbolic gifts to loyal employees. Your team preferred something more televisual. The implications fell like thunder. The program had deliberately ignored the evidence to create drama. They knew of Maria's innocence and proceeded anyway. Attorney Blackstone, realizing the weight of the truth, simply lowered his head, but exposed as frivolous. The lawyer for the accusing party began to speak. Your Honor, perhaps we could reach some kind of agreement. Jonathan Roumie turned to face him. His voice, now filled with a new authority, made the developer step back. You spent months harassing a 73-year-old woman. You accused her of theft, forced her to face legal procedures she couldn't afford. You knew all the jewelry she received was legitimate. The full scope of the situation was becoming clear. This was not a simple misunderstanding. It was systematic harassment against a vulnerable woman by a wealthy man who believed he could use the legal system as a weapon. This case was never about a bracelet, Jonathan continued, now addressing the cameras directly. It was about power, about what happens when people with resources decide those without deserve neither dignity nor truth. The judge tried to regain control. Mr. Roumie, although your evidence is certainly compelling. Compelling, Jonathan repeated with a note of disbelief in his voice. Your Honor, this evidence proves an innocent woman was terrorized by false accusations for months. It proves your program deliberately ignored the truth in the name of manufactured drama. It proves you used your platform to attack my character instead of seeking justice. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang over the room. And it proves something even deeper. That authority without accountability is merely organized cruelty. Maria Santos, encouraged by Jonathan's firm defense, found her voice for the first time in the process. In English with a slight accent, she said, Judge, I have cleaned houses for 50 years. I raised 4 children. I sent money to my family in El Salvador. I never asked for anything but respect. Her voice trembled, but her determination was firm. "This man," she pointed to Blackstone, "called me a thief, said I steal because I'm poor, because I'm an immigrant. But Mr. Roumie knows I'm a good person. Mrs. Chen knew I'm a good person. And now the world will know too." The power dynamic had completely reversed. The judge, who had begun the trial with total control, now struggled to maintain any authority. "Furthermore," Jonathan said, pulling out a document, "Mrs. Chen left specific instructions in her will regarding this situation. She anticipated someone might question her gift to Maria and wrote a clear statement explaining her reasoning." He handed the document to the judge, who read it with visible discomfort. "Maria Santos served my family with love and dedication for 20 years. The bracelet was a small token of gratitude to someone who cared for my children as if they were her own, who stood by me during my husband's terminal illness, and who brought joy to our home every day. If anyone questions this gift, they have not understood what generosity is, nor the value of a pure heart." The judge lifted her eyes from the document, her face mixing shame and defeat. The moral authority in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. What she said next would begin her process of redemption, or seal her public humiliation. But one thing was certain. The world had just witnessed the power of truth, spoken with serene courage. Silence in the courtroom stretched for long seconds. The woman known for swift judgments and harsh remarks was speechless, faced not only with evidence of Maria's innocence, but with her own failure as a judge and as a human being. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Case dismissed." But Jonathan was not finished. He stepped closer to the bench with the calm of someone who had found his moral center. "Your Honor, dismissing the case does not resolve what happened here today." The judge looked at him, for the first time, vulnerability on her face. "You used your platform to mock my faith, to turn my pain, especially over the loss of my spiritual daughter in a missionary project, into entertainment. You used my spirituality as a joke and ignored evidence that could have prevented all this." The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this historic reversal. "But I want those watching to understand. This is not about me," Jonathan said, looking into the camera lens. "This is about how we treat each other when we have power over someone else's story." He gestured to Maria, who quietly wept with relief. "Maria Santos deserves more than to have the case dismissed. She deserves recognition for being wronged. She deserves an apology for being called a thief when there was proof of her innocence. She deserves recognition for 50 years of service and dedication." The judge's tough persona was crumbling before the simplicity of the truth. The authority figure who for decades had brought others down was now dismantled by unwavering moral clarity. Jonathan turned firmly to the cameras. "Your beliefs matter. Your spiritual practices matter. Your pain matters. Your experience of love, loss, and connection matters. Don't let anyone tell you faith is foolishness or that spiritual experience is an illusion." His voice carried the weight of someone who had endured deep losses, sat with people in suffering, and experienced presences beyond the physical. "Love is stronger than death. Consciousness goes beyond the brain. And treating others with dignity is not weakness. It is the most powerful attitude we can have." The judge finally managed to speak. "Mr. Roumie, perhaps I overstepped." "You did more than that," Jonathan replied kindly but firmly. "You used your authority as a weapon. You showed that power without wisdom becomes cruelty. But you also gave everyone watching a choice, to follow the path of arrogance and aggression, or to choose something better." He helped Maria stand, treating the elderly woman with the same reverence he would show a queen. They can choose to see service as valuable, regardless of position. They can honor faith instead of mocking it. They can protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. And they can use their platforms to lift up, not tear down. The transformation in the courtroom was complete. What began as an ambush became a lesson in grace under pressure, in dignity met with dignity, truth spoken with calm power. Jonathan turned to Maria. "You are not only innocent of theft, you are rich in the things that truly matter. You served with love, gave without expecting anything in return, and kept your dignity even when they tried to take it from you." As they left the courtroom together, Jonathan's final words were captured by the cameras and shared by millions around the world. "Faith is not foolishness. Spiritual experience is not an illusion, and treating others with kindness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength we have. The episode aired exactly as it happened, without any editing to soften the judge's humiliation or Jonathan Roumie's moral victory. Millions of viewers would remember that, sometimes, the calmest voices carry the greatest power, and that the deepest faith is expressed not only in words but in actions. By defending Maria Santos, Jonathan Roumie stood up for everyone who has ever been made to feel small for believing in something greater than themselves, and the world would not forget.